Hey guys, welcome back for another episode of The Suited Shootist. This week, we're going to kind of take another look at a lesson that I wish that I'd learned earlier. And it also very much ties into my focus on the social aspects of an armed lifestyle. Because when I talk about that, it's not just navigating the social considerations of the world while you are armed, but it's also understanding how an armed lifestyle and a pursuit of defense craft is perceived by people outside of that sphere. Generally, when you have somebody that asks why we deem these things necessary in terms of the pursuit of skill, concealed carry equipment, and all this other stuff, it is usually met with a response that paints a very dire worldview. You'll see people quote crime statistics and, talk about just how the world is a dangerous place and all this other stuff. And I think that that's actually counterproductive, and here's why. It's counterproductive on a few different fronts. Number one, it's leveraging fear, and whether intentional or not, most of the time it's well-intentioned. Sometimes it's intentionally manipulative, but that's what it is. It's emotional manipulation. You're trying to play on somebody's fear to get them to adopt your way of thinking. And again, it's not particularly productive. There are people that will hear that and find it motivating. There are other people who will hear that and give up before they start. And I don't think it does those people a service to alienate them at the early stages, especially since it's not uncommon for people in that camp to generally be dismissed and written off as, weak or as sheep or, some other pejorative. And arguably those are the people that need these skills the most. And, it's really easy to explain something to somebody that already shares your method of thinking and already shares your perspectives. It's a lot harder to take somebody who views all of this as abnormal, unusual, weird, and frame it in such a way that it's relevant to their life experience and their worldview. And the other part is, it is very easy if your profession or if your primary pastime centers around violence and criminal predation, that you can get this kind of misanthropic, very cynical worldview. And that can have an overall negative impact on your quality of life. And so I think it's important to look at the language that we use here, because this was probably 6+ years ago at this point. I don't remember exactly where, but there was somebody from the UK that was inquiring, it seemed like in reasonably good faith, as to why Americans deemed concealed carry necessary. And, you had all the saber-rattling idiots just kind of chiming in with their preferred talking points that did nothing to advance the discussion. And I tried to sort of craft a thoughtful response to help make the position a little bit more understandable, if not one that they would adopt. And it wasn't intentional at that point, but it's something that I have adopted more intentionally since then. Simply talking about the fact that the world isn't ugly or it's not dangerous inherently. If that were the case, we would be involved in much more violence, much more regularly every time we set out the door. What it is it's unforgiving. It is intolerant of apathy. It is intolerant of oblivion. It is intolerant of carelessness. There's no guardrails. And so, there's plenty of people out there that walk home safe and, go through the door every day just because of sheer dumb luck. And they didn't happen to cross someone that would view them as food. But again, being the subject of violent crime isn't necessarily a guarantee. So framing it as the world being unforgiving as opposed to ugly and dangerous gives the individual a little bit more control. They're not immediately struck with this sense of like, there's a life-altering experience around every corner. And it's up to them to determine how much extra control they want to exercise in their own self-preservation. But I've personally found that framing it that way makes the whole concept a little bit more accessible and not as polarizing or intimidating to people. And again, going back to it, if this is a primary focus for people, it's real easy for that to sort of taint your overall outlook. And a very good friend of mine, Kurt Clark, we were talking about other just life shit, and he made the observations like, man, all the bad stuff in life is mandatory. All the good shit's completely optional. So go out there and get as much of the good as you possibly can. And I think it's important that we not lose sight of that, because I'm fortunate in that everybody that I know that carries a firearm for defense of self or others, at their core, at their core, they're insanely compassionate. They're kind of humanitarians. They believe in people at large, and so they deem it necessary to create as non-permissive an environment as possible for the segment of society that takes advantage of people's overall good nature. Chris Seipert has talked about this on at least one podcast appearance, and Ross Hick made a pretty kind of poignant Facebook post about it as well recently. But again, I think it's just one of those things that's worth talking about, because I know I've talked previously kind of about the potential for this Travis Bickle-esque mentality to creep in. And it's a bit hyperbolic, it's a bit melodramatic, but it can also be a fairly good representation of what can happen, where, you have folks that kind of feel compelled to just harden themselves to the world and are missing out on a lot of the more positive aspects of the human experience. So, like I said, I thought I'd share that, because while it is absolutely incumbent on us to make sure that we keep ourselves and our own safe, we also got to make sure that we're not missing out. Again, like Melody Lauer says, make sure that you don't focus so much on self-defense that you forget to actually have a life worth defending. Because, there's a great philosopher that once said, life moves pretty fast, and if you don't stop to look around once in a while, you might miss it. So, again, let's just not lose sight of why we do this, and let's not make the world out to be a more hostile place than it absolutely has to. So, go out and enjoy some of the good shit this week. Stay dangerous, stay sharp.